No one tells you this part. They talk about light, about freedom, about finding meaning. They don't talk about the quiet inventory that comes later. The moments when you start counting what is no longer there. Not in anger, not in regret, just in disbelief. Because you never imagine that obedience can feel like subtraction. That choosing God can feel less like gaining a direction, and more like watching pieces of your life drift out of reach, one by one. I used to think faith was a door you walk through. Now I know it can also be a narrowing road. And every step forward asks a silent question. What are you willing to leave behind? I didn't know my answer at the time. I only knew that something in me had already decided to keep walking, even before I understood the cost. Before my life learned the language of loss, it spoke fluently in belonging. I moved through my days without needing to explain myself. My place in the world felt natural, like something inherited rather than chosen. I understood the rules. I recognized the faces. I knew which doors would open when I knocked. There was comfort in that kind of certainty. Not excitement, not perfection, just stability. I knew how to be seen. I knew how to be understood. I knew how to be accepted without translation. My beliefs were part of that landscape, woven quietly into routine. They did not disturb relationships or rearrange conversations. They existed like background music, present, steady, unquestioned. I wasn't searching for a new path. I wasn't restless. I wasn't trying to become someone else. If you had asked me then what I wanted most, I would have said something simple. To remain where I was known. To keep what was familiar. To grow old inside the shape of a life that already fit. I didn't realize how fragile that shape was, or how easily it could change once the heart begins to move ahead of the world around it. The change did not arrive like an argument. It arrived like a quiet interruption, a pause in the middle of familiar thoughts, a hesitation where certainty used to live, a feeling that something true had entered my life without asking permission. I didn't announce it to anyone. At first, I barely admitted it to myself. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't loud. It didn't demand that I destroy what I had. It only asked that I stop pretending I hadn't heard it. Something inside me began to rearrange its priorities. What once felt important became lighter. What once felt distant became heavy with meaning. I tried to keep everything the same on the outside. Same routines, same tone of voice, same careful smile. But inwardly, a different gravity had taken hold. And gravity, once it changes, reshapes everything that stands on it. I still sat in the same rooms, still spoke to the same people, still lived inside the same days. But I was no longer standing in the same place. That was the moment the losses began. Not visibly, not immediately, but inevitably. Loss does not always arrive as a farewell. Sometimes it enters quietly, disguised as distance. It began with small changes, replies that took longer to come, conversations that stayed closer to the surface, voices that softened, as if something fragile stood between us. No one accused me of anything. No one raised their voice. But warmth became careful. And care, when repeated too often, becomes space. I noticed it in the way laughter shortened, in how plans were made without my name included, in how certain stories were no longer shared with me first. I was still present, but no longer central. Some people drifted without explanation. Others stayed, but differently, polite, controlled, unsure of where to place me. With a few, the change was painful in its silence. We continued to speak. We just stopped speaking honestly. I learned how it feels to be remembered but not fully welcomed. To be recognized but no longer relied upon. To be loved in theory, yet held at a distance in practice. Nothing dramatic had happened. No betrayal. No argument. Only the slow realization that the person I was becoming no longer fit the version of me they had learned how to hold. And relationships, like houses, are built around certain shapes. When the shape changes, some rooms no longer exist. After people, I began to lose something harder to describe. My position. Not a title, not a role written on paper, but the invisible space a person occupies inside a community. The place where your presence is expected, where your voice carries weight, where your absence would be noticed. At first, I couldn't name what felt different. Rooms seemed the same. Faces looked familiar. Routines continued. But I was standing slightly outside of them. I felt it in conversations that no longer waited for my opinion. In decisions that happened without my knowing. In the way introductions slowly changed. Not unkind, just cautious. I had not been removed. I had been repositioned. And with that shift, another loss followed quietly. The version of myself that existed only because others reflected it back to me. The confident one. The predictable one. The one who belonged without effort. Without that mirror, I had to face a strange question. Who am I, when no one is certain where to place me? I carried my name, my memories, my beliefs, but the outline of my identity blurred. I was no longer fully who I had been, and not yet clearly who I was becoming. It felt like standing in a house after the furniture has been removed. The walls are still there, but the meaning of the space has changed. After people, after belonging, I lost something quieter. Certainty. Not the kind written in books, the kind you feel in your body. The feeling that tomorrow will look like today, that your place in the world is stable, that whatever happens, you know where you stand. That safety dissolved slowly. I began to measure my words before speaking, to study faces for signals, to wonder which version of me would be acceptable in which room. Nothing threatened me directly. There was no danger I could point to. Only the steady understanding that I was no longer protected by familiarity. I did not know who would defend me if misunderstandings grew. I did not know how far silence could stretch before it became separation. I did not know what would remain if more things quietly disappeared. Even simple choices felt heavier. Where to go? Who to trust? What parts of myself to reveal? I had lived for years inside invisible shelter, and I hadn't known it was there until it was gone. Following God did not take my physical safety. It took something more delicate. The confidence that I belong somewhere unconditionally. And once that disappears, every step feels louder. Every decision leaves a deeper echo. What I lost on the outside created a noise on the inside. A constant, unfinished conversation. I began to question my own footsteps. Was I moving forward, or just moving away? I replayed moments that could have gone differently. Words I could have softened. Truths I could have folded into silence. There were days I believed I had mistaken courage for stubbornness. Days I wondered if faith was supposed to feel this lonely. I imagined an easier version of my life. One where I returned to familiar rooms, smiled at familiar faces, learned how to keep certain thoughts locked behind polite expressions. I told myself it would not be lying, just selective honesty, a small compromise. But every time I pictured that future, something inside me tightened. Not fear, recognition. I knew the shape of that life. It would be quieter on the outside and heavier on the inside. I would regain comfort, but I would lose something harder to recover: the ability to respect my own reflection. So I lived between two pressures: the ache of what I had already lost, and the deeper ache of what I would lose if I betrayed what had changed within me. There was no perfect answer, only the choice between a visible loss and an invisible one. I didn't announce my choice. I lived it. In the sentences I stopped rewriting, in the truths I no longer hid behind careful language, in the moments I chose to remain silent rather than pretend. There was no ceremony, only a quiet acceptance that I could not carry two versions of myself any longer. I understood that some losses could still be avoided, if I was willing to become smaller, if I was willing to let parts of my conscience starve quietly, if I was willing to trade depth for comfort. But I was already tired of shrinking. So I let the distance exist. I let the misunderstandings settle where they needed to settle. I let certain relationships fade without trying to rescue them with half-truths. Not because they didn't matter, but because honesty mattered more. Choosing God did not feel heroic. It felt narrow, like stepping onto a bridge that allows only one person at a time. No room for performance, no space for applause. Just the slow discipline of walking forward without turning back to measure who is still watching. That was the moment I stopped negotiating with the cost. Not because I stopped caring, but because I finally understood what kind of life I was unwilling to live. After everything that left my life, something stayed. Not loudly, not visibly, but steadily. I gained the strange ability to sit alone without feeling divided. My thoughts no longer argued with my actions. My silence no longer hid another story. My prayers no longer competed with my fear of being misunderstood. I did not gain a larger world. I gained a clearer one. There were fewer voices around me, but the one inside me no longer trembled when it spoke. I learned that peace is not always the presence of people. Sometimes it is the absence of pretending. I learned that faith does not replace what it takes away. It reshapes what remains. I lost relationships that were built on who I used to be. I lost the safety of being unexamined. I lost the comfort of standing in familiar shadows. But I did not lose myself. And that, I discovered, was the one loss I could not afford. If you are listening to this and counting your own losses, if obedience has emptied rooms in your life, if honesty has made your world smaller, know this: you are not being punished. You are being refined. Some paths do not grow wider as you walk them. They grow truer. And sometimes, that truth costs more than we expected. But it also leaves us with something no distance can take away: a life that no longer has to hide from itself.